Hey there everyone. Today we're going to focus on mastering CSS Events. Let's get started. Hey there everyone. Today we're going to be focusing on CSS selectors of a certain variety. Now, in the video title, we say we're going to be focusing on CSS Events. And specifically, I'm talking about 4 main CSS selectors that allow us to make our websites a lot more interactive, a lot more lively. So today we're going to go ahead and focus on those 4 in order to really beef up our websites. Let's jump in. So to begin, I actually want to touch on the fact that you're probably familiar with a lot of these selectors and have interacted with them on websites on an almost daily basis. If you mainly scroll on mobile, that might be a different situation, but if you've ever used a desktop or a laptop, you've most definitely seen these events. Now, the 4 primary events selectors I'm going to be discussing today are hovered, something we're all familiar with, a visited selector, a focus selector, and a active selector. So with these 4 selectors, we'll look into how each of them works, how they can make our websites better, and how and why they're used in the industry to this day. So to get started, let's go ahead and start with visited links, just because they're the simplest and they're pretty small in contrast to the other selectors that we'll be using today. Prior to jumping directly into what a active link, or visited link I should say, since that's our first topic, looks like, I actually want to give you guys a rundown of what we'll be working with today in terms of our playground to understand this. Obviously you can build whatever element and or block that you'd like, but in this instance I built a box with a header, a paragraph, and a button. That way we could see and actively watch all the things that we can do with these 4 selectors. Now, I've built this out in Flex, but without too much further detail, I'll scan through this code real quick. You guys can pause the video as you need. But with that, let's go ahead and jump into what a visited link is and how we can modify it. To get started with the visited, where I actually already messed up, and we are going to need to add a link to our material. So I'll go ahead and add another link, and just like the button below, we'll say click me. This one will be exaggerated just because we really need to click on this link. Let me add an href so it goes somewhere, or theoretically somewhere. And here you can see we have our blue link underlined. The straight, standard that automatically gets applied to any links, as well as just unvisited links. But if we click this, we'll find that it turns purple, and it keeps the underlined text. That is a result of our visited link. So, if we wanted to, we're going to, in order to change what it looks like after it's been clicked on, we'll use our first selector. And in order to properly address it, we're going to go ahead and add a class of, well, not a class, but more so an ID of box link. And with box link, we'll go ahead and use hashtag box link colon visited. And with this, we'll go ahead and change the color of our visited link to red instead. So hopefully if we click on this link, it's now red. That's pretty much it when it comes to the visited selector and property. The thing with selectors is that you'll find that they actually in the syntax come before the brackets in order to create that clause. And really, when it comes to selectors and or these specific CSS events, we'll find that it's a case of either true or false. And with that, we'll go ahead with that idea, we'll be able to understand that these are really just conditions, and with those conditions being true, we can go ahead and change a property about an element. Now, for visited, it's specifically tied to links and only links, but though you can kind of use them in a gray area when it comes to buttons. But with that, let's go ahead and move on to our next selector. Moving on from visited, we'll be transitioning over into the focus selector. With focused, we'll actually have to consider a new form of navigation. Now, when it comes to navigating the web, usually there's different interfaces people use. And when it comes to accessibility, people who can't use mice and or prefer using their keyboard to navigate websites, which is possible, have different ways that they need different needs when it comes to their navigation of the website. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and click on my body text right here. And then I'm going to click on the tab button on my keyboard. You'll see this black box appear around the link that we had previously built. This is the focused state in action. We specifically told the browser to focus on that element right there. And if we actually went back, oh, I guess it broke my web page, activated a shortcut in CodePen, but either way, here we have our focused state, and if we look through my CSS, we'll see that I have the box button here, and you'll see this focus selector in action switch to a new red-based color, reddish color. It's actually going to be purple, but you'll find that here will change what the focus state looks like. Here, we change the background simply by adding the focus selector, changing the background color, and now instead of just the black box, which can be changed, we also changed the background color of the button. So now this lends the option to create two interfaces in a way. One for people who are potentially using mobile, one who are using mouse, and one for people who are using keyboard. The focus focus selector can be used on more than just links, unlike the visited selector that we used previously, and can be used in a lot more cases. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to our next selector. Now, in order to showcase our use of our next selector, which is the active selector, we'll actually go ahead and review the CSS that I've added. Just like the selectors we've used previously, all we do is call our ID or class, follow it with a colon, and then the selector, which in this case is active. Now, what I've done here is, again, change the background color to the same one I used previously for the focus selector, and then below I've actually also changed the width and the height of the button so that we can see what kind of a difference an active selector can make. Ideally, active selectors are kind of like an alert that the event has happened. So in the case of a button, we can use it to make it more apparent that it's been clicked. For example, when I click on this, it changes the color, and that's actually because I've added an active link selector to the link as well. But in the case of a button, I want something a little bit more exaggerated, something with a little bit more pop. So in this case, I changed the width and the height. So when I am actively clicking on the button, it will look just like this. Now, this is useful when you want to add some extra detail to a button on a page and or an element, because this can actually apply to any element you'd like. However, it doesn't have too much use outside of that, because the next selector we'll touch on is probably the better use case when it comes to these types of selectors and these types of events. So, as our final selector, let's go ahead and move on to hover. So now our final, most common, and actually easiest selector is going to be the hover selector in CSS. With hover, we can go ahead and select any element that we have in mind and create a secondary state where this element, when hovered on by either mouse and or a pressed down finger, which still counts as a click, it gets weird when it comes to mobile, will allow for a change in the state of that element. So, for example, previously I had to click on my button in order to get the change. Now, not only am I missing that black border that came preloaded into active, but we also have the same colors, the same change that happened. And this can be really effective in just emphasizing anything that you want to be read over. So, for example, I'm going to go ahead and specifically call out the paragraph tag. So here I'll go ahead and add a selector for P, or the paragraphs, and then create a hover selector. And with that, I want to change the text to yellow when I hover over it. Now, even though this is a bad design choice, this will be a great example, just because, like that, you'll see that it can make a massive difference in any sort of element on a web page. And really, when it comes down to it, there's not too much more to explain. Hover events are simple, straightforward, and pretty easy to implement onto a website. And with that, we've covered the visited, focused, active, and hover selectors within CSS. Next week, we'll touch on even more selectors, but instead of them being centered around the idea of events happening within our web page, we'll focus on CSS selectors that allow for us to better manage and better organize the CSS on our web pages, as well as also making CSS that's responsive to added content or content that's removed. So until then, have a nice day.